Hello everybody and welcome back to part 49 and the last build episode at any rate of this Trumpeter 1/200 scale HMS Hood build with the Pontos full detail set. It's a project which I started back in October 2020, so it's almost exactly 10 months since that date. And I think I remember saying in one of the first couple of episodes that I was hoping to finish the model by April this year. So I was expecting something like a 6-month build, but obviously it's taken quite a bit longer than that. And the reason for that really is down to the Pontos set, which is really involved and detailed and takes an awful lot of work to put together. But it's something that we've managed to do, and in this episode I just want to finish the model off. And to do that, I'll be fitting the railings to the quarterdeck and the ensign staff to the very stern of the ship. And I've also got some pieces of detail to fit to the port side, which is the side that I'll be viewing the model. So the side that you're looking at is the side that I'll be viewing the model from when it's finally in its display case. So as well as doing the quarterdeck, I'll be fitting the accommodation ladders to the port side. There are 2 accommodation ladders to fit. And there are also the booms which fit to the forward bulkhead just under the pom-pom platform here. So there's a small amount of building to be done over at the bench, but then we'll come over to the ship and let's get it finished. The first thing I'm going to do today is to put together these booms. These are 50-foot swinging booms, and they were located on the hull side just below the forward pom-poms. So this is all Pontos parts, and the boom is turned brass, and I've just fitted this little pivot at the back. We've seen these done before with the other derricks and booms. So that part just folds through 180 degrees and pushes into a hole that Pontos provide at the end of the boom. So that's straightforward enough. We also have these mounting brackets. These fit to the hull side. And as you can see, they just fold through 180 degrees. And again, I'm not gluing those. They just fold up. And there's this loop here that has a couple of small holes in it, or hooks, that allow you to fit the tackle, which is this part here. But we'll see how that goes together. And then there's this very small little bracket which fits to the hull side and holds the upper side of the tackle itself. This is the pivot bracket which goes on the hull, and this has got quite a few complicated bends in it, or it's hard to work out what goes where on it really. I'll show you it once it's folded up, what it should look like. So that's the part when it's folded. The rear face has a flat on it which fits up against the hull side, and a small hole in the top of the plate which accepts the pivot. So something like that when it's all together. So to put this together, I didn't follow the instructions, to be honest, with this. I've already done the starboard side, And Pontos provide this template with little slots in it for these to locate these mounting brackets. And this is for the forward pivot that we've just made. And this is for the top bracket for the tackle here. So that goes there, this goes here, and these brackets fit along in these positions here. And what Pontos want you to do in the instructions is to tape this to the bulkhead on the hull and presumably mark up the positions of these brackets. But what I found it easier to do was to assemble the boom with all its brackets, just using the template as a reference guide for the spacing. So just laying the part along like that and putting it together using the template off the ship. So this won't go anywhere near the ship. And I found it easy enough just to position the boom with all its assembled brackets just glued onto the side of the bulkhead, and that worked okay. So that's what we'll do again for the port one. So the first thing to do is to glue the pivot bracket in place. Just make sure we get it orientated correctly, bearing in mind that this is going on the port side and the boom, when stowed, faces aft. Now we can fit these brackets, and it's important to get these in the right order. They are different very, very slightly, but they are different. So this shorter one goes towards the pivot, so that's first on. And then the next one, which is a little bit longer. Then we need to fit the hook for the tackle, and that has a stop. It can't go beyond this point because there's a stop on the boom, so that locates the part in the proper place. And when we're attaching that, it's important to get it in the correct orientation. So we want the hook at the top to accept the tackle when we come to fit it. And then finally the long bracket goes on beyond the hook. So I can use the template now to position these brackets at the correct distance along the boom. And I'll just locate that with a bit of extra thin. It doesn't need much, just enough to get it in the right position. It's not absolutely critical to get these parts in exactly the right location, and that's because there are no location holes on the hull. So if they're out by a fraction, it's not going to be visible really. The point of using the templates is to get them roughly in the right place and to make sure that port and starboard, they're more or less equal. I'll paint that off the model and then just touch it in once it's assembled. You're bound to get some spots of super glue on the hull, so it's possible just to go in afterwards with the airbrush and just touch in where you've applied the cement. So it is important to get these brackets here in the correct order. because, as I said, they are different lengths. The shorter one at this end towards the pivot and the longer one towards the open end. So the boom actually stands away slightly at this end from the hull bulkhead. Now this tackle is fairly tricky to get fitted, so it's useful to do it off the model. You can see trying to do this actually on the ship is a bit of a trial and you risk causing damage, so it's just easier to try and do it now. And once that's in, it's best to just apply a little bit of glue just to hold it, because you don't want that coming off on you. And just get it to roughly the correct angle. So something like that. And the last thing to do is just to prepare the location point for the top of the tackle where it fits to the hull bulkhead. And this is just a ring really with a very small tab on it. It's probably, you're not going to be able to see it, it's so small. There, you can just get it there. And I'll just bend the ring down. Next up we'll do the accommodation ladders. And you can see we've got two sizes. The longer one goes next to the side barriers, and this shorter one, which I've broken the platform off incidentally, but we'll be able to fix that. This shorter one goes next to the quarterdeck, and we also have some top platforms and some tackle. These are for the longer accommodation ladder. Obviously these are rigged to davits, and I've already fitted the davits for the long ladder when I was doing the side barriers, but I'll need to make another one for the shorter ladder. So these are the davits for the quarterdeck ladders, but we'll just put those to one side and we'll deal with this longer one first. So because it's so long, we need to bend it using some long nosed pliers. And as usual, we'll just bend up the treads. And this bottom platform bends upwards. Now I will solder these for strength. So that's the completed ladder, but I'll solder it up for strength down at the bottom. That's all I'm going to do with it. It's just the tiniest spot of solder, and it's just held that railing in place, and that squares everything up. It's important with these to get these tabs at the top. They're very small, but they're the only thing that holds the ladder onto the platform, and the tackle just fits into the bottom like that, and that's ready to go up to the davit. I'm going to leave that loose, gives some adjustment on that. This is the platform which goes at the top, so the ladder will go in that sort of position. With the platforms, the difficult thing to do is to get the railings bent properly. But it's important that we get them done first because they need to be secured with some solder. They're very fragile. And getting them soldered just gives them the tiniest little bit of strength. So with these, we don't want a lot of flux on them. I don't want to be flooding the grating. So just a tiny amount of solder on there. Just enough to hold it, that's all we want, like that. And then we bend the platform underneath, like that, and again get this soldered. We don't want it coming apart. So with that soldered up, you can just bend these supporting arms down. With parts like this, one of the things you've just got to be careful with how you pick them up, because if you're just slightly rough with them, it just completely distorts them and they're ruined. So you've got to have a really gentle touch when you're picking them up. So those are the two platforms. I'll fold the shorter of the two ladders up. This is the one where I'm going to have difficulty because I've got to somehow refit the bottom platform. So I think what I'm going to have to do is bend the railing into its position and then use that as a location to get the bottom platform in. I think I might have got away with that. Okay, so managed to sort that out, got away with it. Replaced the tread and got the bottom platform in all right. The tackle for these is obviously a bit shorter. So there are the accommodation ladders all ready to paint up. So I'll just put those to one side and just make the davits up for the after accommodation ladder. So these are fairly straightforward, they're just a 180-degree bend to fall back on themselves. And again, we'll be soldering this for strength just at the top. Make sure it's all nicely in line. And at the bottom of these, there are these little bases. Just involves folding them up. And again, get these soldered because we want a firm fixing of these onto the deck. I think they're a bit unnecessary really. Pontos could easily have etched those as part of the davit itself. I don't think there's any need to have that as a separate part. But it's often the case with Pontos that they overcomplicate things sometimes. So those are the davits, and I'll just add those to the collection of parts that we're going to be painting next. The last thing to do over here at the bench is to build the ensign staff. We did the jack staff on the bow last week, so this is a very similar sort of construction really. These are all the parts for the ensign staff, so quite a few bracket parts and the turn brass parts as well, including a little lamp here at the top. So 13 parts there for a single ensign staff. Just goes to show the detail in this Pontos set. The first thing to do is to fit this bracket, which goes right to the top of the staff. Obviously that needs to go on first. Just attach that with a tiny drop of extra thin. Barely visible really, but we all know it's there. And then this central bracket. So I'm not going to glue that centre bracket in place yet. And that's because I want to fit these two stays, which are the back stays. And obviously the length of the backstay determines the height that the bracket needs to be fitted at. Each of the backstays has this bracket as well, which goes on the bottom. So that attaches down onto the deck. The lamp needs to be separated from this part. It's Pontos's way of turning these brass parts. There are often more than one part on each assembly. This part fits between the two brackets, so that can go in place at this stage. And this bottom bracket is quite a complicated thing to bend up. We have an eyelet down at the bottom and two pieces which need to come up. And the bottom bracket fits and locates both of those parts. So I'll get some glue on the bottom, that'll secure all that. And then, having got the bottom in place, we can then just lock the top into position. We're going to have to fit these backstays because the lamp holder needs to attach to these parts. And I'm going to assemble it onto the ship in that condition. I think trying to fit all these lamps and tiny pieces to the front is not likely to work. So I'll paint that up, fit it to the ship, and then once I've got a nice firm fixing of the staff, I can then come back and fit these brackets and lamps and all these tiny details. Okay, so over at the ship, and I want to fit the ensign staff first. I've drilled the holes that I need in the deck and partially painted the ensign staff just down at the bottom where it joins the deck, and that's just to avoid any masking. Obviously you wouldn't be able to mask this, you'd have to brush paint it. So I'm going to attach this with some thick super glue. Having the masking tape on the end of the tweezers just minimises any potential damage to the paintwork. Okay, so that's all right. Just make sure that it's vertical, which it is. Now we've got the tricky task of fitting the lamps which went on the back of the ship. These are unpainted at the moment. I just need to get a photograph of this arrangement just to see how high this lamp went. And I remember there's a good photograph in the Battlecruiser Hood book. So according to the book, this lamp goes halfway down. When that's dry, just ignoring these side braces, they go to the backstays. But I'm just ignoring those for the moment until that's set. Okay, so these should be firm enough now to bend back and attach them. The arms are a bit long, so we can just trim those off a little bit. Obviously you have to do this before you fit any of the railings. Last of all, we'll fit the lamp. And then now that all that's together, I can come back in with the airbrush and paint all these other details in, just very carefully, obviously. Don't want to be getting any paint on the decks. I just want to paint the lamp with a little bit of silver. This is Tamier's sparkling silver from the lacquer range. Okay, the first job here with these sides is to get this swinging boom fitted. You can see I've pre-painted it, but it will need some touch-up, I think. So that's the approximate position, something like that. So I'll use some thick super glue on the brackets, especially the one at the front. This needs super glue, this part, because it's quite heavy. And obviously there's nothing to support it apart from the brackets, so we need to get a good fixing with this. And the aim is to get it parallel to the hull. Just hold it for a few seconds. No, I'm going to have to try again with that. Thick super glue is meant to be a 40-second cure, but when there's something like this that really doesn't want to go, I'll stick around a bit longer with it. The top bracket hardly needs any attachment really, but I will just put a drop of glue behind it. It's springing onto the bulkhead quite naturally anyway. So I have some of the grey loaded in the airbrush, so I'll quickly go in and just tidy that up a little bit. It'll hide the glue spots. Okay, time to fit these accommodation ladders now. So the platform fits like that on the side. I'm just getting the stays underneath at the right angle, or a close enough angle anyway. They're going to have to go back quite a way, but I do want them to get in the right position because they will support the platform a little bit. Okay. Now with these, I want to use the davit to support the bottom of the ladder whilst I fit it. So we'll just hook the tackle onto the davit. And now with that hooked on, the trick is to get the ladder onto the platform. I've just knocked the whaler off, but I'm not going to worry about that for the moment. Let's just pop that back on before it gets damaged. This is the problem with the model at this stage. There are all sorts of bits and pieces hanging over the edge. And the slightest false move, as you've just seen, means that you're likely to undo some of your work. The tackle will get painted black just when it's all dry. But for the moment I'm going to leave that as it is. I might have to get just a tiny bit more glue on the platform here, but I don't want to risk it just yet. So with the after accommodation ladder, that fits here, and I've made a gap in the railing, so Pontos provide this full length, and I've just cut the railing out where we've got the accommodation ladder to go in. So as before, the first job is to put the platform in, and again the stays underneath need to come up quite a bit because of the undercut of the hull. Now with this one we need to fit the davits, so I'm going to have to drill a couple of holes for those. The first one fits just to the side, so just be careful here I don't want to go all the way down, damage the railing. We don't need a deep hole, there's hardly any connection point. This one doesn't support anything, the first one. I'll have it turned inboard slightly. The position of the second davit's a bit more critical because obviously it's got to join up with the tackle that we've fitted. So what I'm going to have to do is fit the ladder first and then use the position of the tackle to determine where to fit the davit. So with the tackle in that position, I'm going to fit the davit just behind that stanchion, I think. That should work. So again, I just want to carefully drill a hole just behind the stanchion. And I want to try and hook this on before I actually glue the davit down. I'm maybe not going to be able to do that, I'm not sure. No, might have to be a bit inventive there. These are obviously incredibly fragile now. So that ladder's reasonably strong actually. I just want to get the tackle fitted. Okay, so they're in. I'll just paint the tackle in now, just do a little bit of touch up where I've scratched the davits. So I've got some Tamiya rubber black. I'll do the same with the aft one. Okay, that'll do. I'm not going to mess about with it anymore. So one thing that I forgot to do earlier on was these, which are the night lifebuoys. There were two of these on the ship, either side of the shelter deck, just in front of the 27-foot whalers. And the function of them was that if anybody went overboard at night, for example, these would be deployed into the water as life rings almost, and they will be illuminated, I think, on contact with the seawater. The problem with these is that, as far as I can see, nowhere in the Pontos instructions does it tell us how to put those together. I've looked several times and I might just be missing it, I don't know, but I can't see any instructions for those. So what I've had to do is to look in the anatomy of the ship book, and there's a decent drawing of the night lifebuoy here on page 125. And that's given me a clue as to how the Pontos etched brass goes together. So I'll build the second one on camera, just in case you want to follow along if you're struggling trying to find the instructions for these. And the first thing we have to do is to fit these braces, which go into very small slots, too small to see on camera. But they're a reasonably positive location. So we'll glue those in first before we do any bending. And it's important to get them in the slots properly, otherwise the whole thing won't fold up if they're not in position. So there's one either side of the central beam. You can feel when they've gone in the slots, there's a little click. So they go together like that. There's a tight radius at the top and a more angled piece at the bottom, so that's the way round that they go. And then this is the only trumpeter part that we need, which is the actual buoy itself, I guess. And the plastic fits into some very small slots just on the top there. So we'll put a spot of glue on that. So that's the plastic part located. And then the cage folds up around it. So there's a bend there. There are bends on the side. And then that whole thing folds over. And just to make sure it all lines up, what I did was to apply some glue to the top of each of the flotation balls. And stick the brass down onto that. So gluing the cage onto the lifebuoy itself just helps to get it in the right position. And then we can just get a little bit of glue onto the side just to seal the cage up. So that's the cage sealed up with the lifebuoy inside. And the only thing we've got to do now is to fold the location brackets down. So there are these at the side which fold down, and they actually mount onto the deck edge. This whole assembly sits at an angle. You'll see when we put it on the ship. And these braces at the bottom go down onto the hull side. So these mount onto the deck edge and these go down onto the side of the hull. And they sit at sort of a 30-degree angle. So those two are ready to paint and go on. I'll put this night lifebuoy in now. It goes here, just in front of the whaler. There's very little contact point on this. That's gone in fine. I'm alright with that. So now that I'm finished in this area, I can glaze this bulkhead where we've got the scuttles. Obviously I've not been able to do this now while I've been doing painting, touch up and so on. But we're all done now, so we can finally put the glazing in. So just the props now, and then we'll be done for this episode. So the last thing for this video is to sort the propellers out. These are the Pontos propellers, and you can see the horrible false gold colour, but they are quite a bit better in shape than the Trumpeter ones. They just need a clean up, and I'm going to repaint them in a bronze colour, so dull them down an awful lot. They do have a casting seam on them, which we've got to remove on each blade, which is the main task really. It's just on the inside there. So just a few swipes with a file just to get rid of that casting seam. The other thing that I've noticed whilst test fitting these props is that the Trumpeter propeller shaft is too wide for the hole, so I'm going to have to drill these out a little bit. And one thing to notice with these is that they are handed, so they are cast differently. So we just need to be careful to get them on the right side of the ship. Just out of interest, these are the Trumpeter propellers. And we can see that the obvious difference is that the blades themselves are a lot flatter. They don't have the curve that should be there when you compare it with drawings. And the other thing is that the bullet is also an awful lot longer and pointed. So when you compare this with photographs, so this is the ship, the Pontos props are a lot more close to being accurate. One other interesting thing is that Trumpeter in the instructions have you fitting these propellers on the wrong side. They are handed, so they rotate in a different direction on either side of the ship. You can see there that there are two pairs. And Trumpeter mark the side of the ship on the back of the propeller, and they have you fit these on the wrong side. So these are supposed to be the right hand propellers, or starboard side, but actually they should be for the port. So just one thing to be careful of if you're building the ship and not using the Pontos props, just to get them on the right side when you're assembling them. So I'll just drill these out, get them primed and painted, and we can get them fitted to the ship. It should finish the stern off nicely. Okay, let's get these props on now. I don't really know whether I should be calling these screws. I'm sure someone will tell me off. Okay, just leave those now to fully cure before I go anywhere near that. So that's it for part 49 and the whole playlist for the build. So thanks for joining me for this one, and for those of you that have been with me right the way from part 1 and have followed the build all the way through the last 10 months, thanks for joining me for those. Next week I will be publishing a part 50 just to round things off with this build, where I'll publish photographs, detailed photographs from stem to stern, and I'll also talk a little bit about what I've learned from the build, things that I might do a bit differently if I were to tackle this again, and hopefully that'll help those of you that are embarking on this build with the Pontos set yourselves. So that's coming up, part 50, just to round things off, next Friday night at 8 o'clock. So I hope to see you then. In the meantime, have a great week everybody, and I'll see you next Friday for the final shots of the model. Bye for now.